Single dad hired a babysitter for his twin daughters, unaware she was the billionaire CEO's daughter in disguise. The hallway echoed with the clash of toys and the hum of the microwave as two 4-year-olds argued over who got more marshmallows in their cocoa. Ethan Walker, 32, stood in the kitchen, phone cradled between his shoulder and ear, one hand stopping a cereal bowl from tipping over. His voice, though quiet, was edged with desperation. "This is the last time I'm begging," he muttered. "If no one shows up, I'm bringing them to work tomorrow, or quitting again." This was the third sitter in 8 weeks. All had left. Lily and Mia weren't bad kids, they were just a lot. He sighed and hung up, turning just in time to see Mia chasing Lily with a spoonful of peanut butter. "Girls, please," he said, stepping between them. "Let's try for one night without a food fight." The doorbell rang. The girls froze. So did he. Ethan opened the door, expecting someone middle-aged, tired, probably already regretting taking the job. Instead, there she was, a young woman, tall, blonde, with a calm confidence in her eyes and a wool sweater that made her look more like a grad student than a nanny. She carried a canvas tote. Snow dusted her boots. "You're the sitter?" he asked. She nodded. "Claire, nice to meet you." He looked her over, skeptical. "You don't look like someone who needs this job." She smiled. "Maybe I just need the right kind of chaos." Before he could reply, Mia darted out from behind him. "Are you here to play unicorns?" Claire knelt. "Only if I get to be the pink one." Lily followed, holding a half-full sippy cup of orange juice. She bumped into Claire, and the juice splashed all over the woman's boots. Time stopped. Ethan tensed, ready to scold, but Claire calmly looked down and said, "Well, I did say I needed a little mess." The girls laughed. Claire smiled and dabbed at the mess with a tissue from her bag like it happened every day. Ethan watched. The last sitter would have stormed out by now. But Claire, she looked like she had just stepped into something she was ready for. Over the next 10 minutes she sat cross-legged on the floor, chatting with the girls about their favorite toys and snacks. They warmed to her fast, too fast. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms folded, observing. Eventually, Claire stood. "I brought some storybooks and a few age-appropriate games. That okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, that's fine." Silence settled between them. Not awkward, just curious. Her curiosity. "You're not from around here," he said. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "No, just needed a change of pace." "You a student?" "Not anymore." "Worked with kids this young before?" She paused for a beat. "Not exactly, but I learn fast, and I'm good with feelings." He raised an eyebrow. "Feelings?" She looked at him, sincere. "That's usually what kids need the most, right? Someone who knows how to listen, even when they can't find the words." He was not expecting that. He just nodded, slowly. Mia handed Claire a tattered stuffed bunny. Claire accepted it like it was made of gold. The girls were already chattering with her like they had known her forever. That never happened. Not with strangers, not even with family. Ethan checked the clock. "I have to be up by 5, he said. "You okay with early mornings?" Claire smiled. "I'll bring the coffee." He looked away before she could see the flicker in his eyes. Later, as she helped the twins carry their blankets into the living room to build a story fort, Ethan leaned against the doorframe and murmured to himself, "Maybe, just maybe. Sometimes it only takes one person to shift everything. One knock, one unexpected voice in the chaos, and everything begins to change." If you've ever believed that love can walk in when you least expect it, and that healing begins with the smallest acts of care, tap the hype button and stay with us. This story is only just beginning. Claire had once negotiated pharmaceutical deals across time zones and defended budgets in ruthless boardrooms. but nothing prepared her for Lily and Mia. On her second day, she walked into the living room and found couch cushions stacked like a pyramid, the girls jumping wildly on top. "Safety is optional in this house," Lily shouted. "Gravity is just a suggestion," Mia yelled. Claire blinked. "Okay, that's fine. Just chaos. Manageable chaos." By lunch, Mia had fed half her mac and cheese to the neighbor's dog through a fence Claire didn't know existed. Lily had decorated the sliding door with yogurt art. Claire stood there, ponytail slipping, applesauce on her sleeve, thinking, "My father always said leadership is about control. Right now, I have none." That night, after bedtime, Claire stared at the hairbrush in her hand. Earlier, Mia had begged for a princess braid. Claire had failed miserably. Her fingers, trained for pens and signatures, couldn't manage a braid. So she opened YouTube, how to French braid toddler hair. One video became 5. She practiced on a towel, then a pillow. At nearly 3 a.m., she managed something decent. The next morning, when Mia asked again, "Can I be Rapunzel today?" Claire knelt down and smiled. "Of course, sweet girl." Mia stared at her reflection in awe. "You did it," she whispered. Lily added, "You're like magic." Claire grinned. "Just practice, and maybe a little midnight fairy dust." It felt better than any corporate win. From the hallway, Ethan watched. She was still here. After the couch jumping, the yogurt, the chaos, she stayed. He stepped into the kitchen. "You're still alive." "Barely," Claire replied, "unless today includes glitter and peanut butter in the laundry." He chuckled. "That happened once. Just once." Ethan noticed how she moved, uncertain but never quitting. That meant something. In the days that followed, Claire adapted to the girls' rhythms. She read stories, not from books, but ones she invented. "There once was a CEO of the forest," she told them one night, "a very serious squirrel who loved charts, until 2 chipmunks stole her spreadsheets." The girls shrieked with laughter as Claire acted out the tale with silly voices and wild gestures. Ethan stood in the hallway, listening. He should have been working, but that laughter pulled him in. He hadn't heard it in this house since before. Then, one morning, a different kind of storm rolled in. Mia woke up flushed, her forehead hot. She wouldn't eat, barely moved. Claire's heart raced. Illness in her world was a problem to reschedule, not a frightened child with watery eyes. She moved quickly, cool towel, water, calm whispers. She found a thermometer, took a reading, and texted Ethan. He offered to come home. She replied, "I've got it." And she did. She stayed by Mia's side all day, reading softly, brushing hair back, holding her hand, until the fever broke. That evening, Ethan came home, but he stopped in the hallway. Claire had fallen asleep on the floor beside Mia's bed. Her head rested gently on the mattress, one hand still holding Mia's. The lights were dim. A picture book lay open beside them. Marker stained her wrist. Her braid was half undone. Mia's face was peaceful. Ethan stood still, watching, feeling something stir. He had hired Claire out of desperation, expected her to last 3 days, 4 at most. But this wasn't just someone doing her job. She had entered their lives, fully, quietly, and maybe, just maybe, she was exactly what they'd all been waiting for. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when Ethan noticed something that didn't fit. Claire had kicked off her shoes at the door like always. She never needed to be told, somehow she just understood the rhythms of his house. But as the sunlight slanted through the window, it caught the leather of her flats. Ethan paused. They weren't flashy. Clean lines, soft beige tone, understated elegance. But he had a good eye. These weren't just any shoes. They were Loro Bruni limited edition flats, the kind not sold in stores, the kind sent only to select clients who lived in penthouses, not small rental homes near quiet woods. He said nothing, but something settled in the back of his mind. That evening, they took the girls out for burgers and crayon-colored tablecloths at a local diner. The twins bickered over which shade was the real pink, while Ethan tried to enjoy a moment of normal. Then the waiter came. Claire smiled politely. "I'll have the roast chicken with herb sauce, please." The waiter blinked. Sure. Roasted chicken, got it." Ethan looked up, eyebrows raised. "You speak French?" he asked. Claire sipped her water. "A little." "That wasn't a little. That was Paris-level perfect. You grow up in France?" She hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "Boarding school," she said quickly, then turned back to the girls, helping Mia with her coloring. Ethan didn't push it, not yet. But questions started building, quietly. The shoes, the accent, the way she carried herself, like someone who'd been trained to blend in, not grow up there. That night, after the twins were in bed, Claire sat at the kitchen table organizing markers and glitter glue for tomorrow's space day. The dishwasher hummed. A breeze tapped gently at the window. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You ever gonna tell me where you're really from?" Claire looked up. Her hand stilled, but her expression didn't change. Calm, careful. She gave a small, tired smile. "Somewhere I couldn't breathe." He nodded, slowly. He understood more than she knew. There were no more questions that night. But he didn't forget. A week later, Ethan overheard her mention a birthday, hers, while helping the girls write cards for their cousin. "October birthdays always get forgotten," she had murmured, mostly to herself. She never mentioned it again. But he remembered. That evening, after the girls were tucked in, Claire came downstairs in her usual quiet way and stopped. The kitchen table had been cleared. 2 mismatched candles flickered in chipped ceramic holders. A plate of warm pancakes sat in the middle, surrounded by bowls of cold strawberries, melting chocolate chips, and whipped cream. Above the window, taped with colorful washi tape, hung a banner made of construction paper. "Happy Birthday, Claire." Ethan stood by the stove, drying his hands on a towel. "You said once you liked breakfast for dinner," he said simply. "Thought I'd make it official." Claire blinked at the table, then at him. "You remembered that?" He gave a small shrug. "You also said strawberries aren't worth eating unless they're cold, and chocolate chips don't count unless they melt." Claire stepped forward, slowly, as if unsure whether she should sit. There were no presents, no balloons, no music. Just pancakes, a crooked banner, and a man who had been listening when no one else had. She picked up her fork, then paused. "This is the nicest birthday I've had in a very long time." Ethan looked down. "It's just pancakes." Claire smiled. "It's not." She didn't need to say thank you. It was in the way she looked at the candles, the way she closed her eyes for a moment before taking a bite, like trying to remember the feeling. He didn't speak. He just watched her. And for the first time since she'd stepped into his world, Ethan realized something simple, terrifying, and true. He didn't just hope she would stay. He was afraid she wouldn't. Claire stared at the email on her phone, her thumb hovering above the reply button. The subject line was short, sharp, and direct, just like everything from her father's office. Confidential, board review, Kensington, succession schedule. Location, NYCHQ. Time, 10:00 AM 2 weeks from today. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read it again. The board was preparing to vote on her future, whether she would be formally named as heir to one of the largest pharmaceutical empires in the world. But there was a condition. 60 days. Her father's challenge. Live without staff, wealth, or title. Take a low-wage job. Live on her own. Understand the value of real work, as he put it. She had chosen this job, babysitter to 2 4-year-olds, not knowing it would feel less like a job and more like a beginning. He locked her phone, tucked it in the drawer, and went to check on the girls. Lily and Mia were playing near the front porch with sidewalk chalk. Claire crouched beside them, complimenting their rainbow tiger, a strangely realistic tiger with green wings. "Can we draw you next?" Mia asked. Claire smiled. "Only if I get wings too." But then came the scream. It was sharp and sudden, and it cut through Claire like a blade. Lily had slipped on a patch of gravel near the steps and landed hard on her arm. Her face crumpled, her cries loud and panicked. Claire rushed to her, checking for broken bones. Lily was clutching her wrist, wincing in pain. Minutes later, they were at the clinic. Claire held Lily in her arms as they waited, stroking her hair and whispering that everything would be okay. Mia sat beside them, unusually quiet, clinging to Claire's coat. Ethan arrived, breathless, worry etched into every line on his face. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Lily and then on Claire. He knelt beside them, touching Lily's cheek. "You're okay, baby. Daddy's here." Claire stood to give him space, but Ethan gently touched her arm. "Thank you for staying with them." "You didn't have to," he added quietly, his voice low, rough around the edges. Claire looked at him, eyes steady. "But I wanted to," and she meant it. Every word. After the doctor examined Lily, just a sprain, thankfully, they returned home with instructions for rest and ice. That night, as Claire sat in the kitchen writing Lily's care notes on a sticky pad, her phone buzzed again. "Dad, incoming call." She stared at the screen. For a moment she considered ignoring it. Then she answered. His voice was ice. "Do you realize what you've just done?" Claire stayed calm. "She fell. She was hurt. I took her to the clinic. You missed a preparatory call with the board." "She's 4, Claire said softly. "You think sentimentality builds empires?" he snapped. "You have 20 board members questioning whether you're serious about this." "I am serious," she replied, her voice firmer now. "But I'm also human. And that little girl needed someone." A long pause. "You get one warning," her father said coldly. "One. If you miss that meeting in New York, do not bother coming back. The name, the company, it will no longer be yours." He hung up. Claire stood there, the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the silence that followed. She felt the weight of both worlds pressing down, one cold and towering, built on discipline and legacy, the other small and loud and messy, full of sticky fingers and chalk tigers, but somehow warmer, truer. She turned off the kitchen light and walked quietly down the hallway. The girls were asleep. Lily's wrist was bandaged, her favorite stuffed elephant tucked under her good arm. Ethan was in the living room, reviewing code on his laptop. He looked up when she entered. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Just a call." He didn't ask more, he never pushed. But for the first time, Claire wished he would, because part of her wanted to say everything, about the board, the test, the inheritance, the pressure. But not tonight. Not yet. Instead, she sat across from him in the quiet, the space between them filled with something unsaid but understood. Two people, each carrying more than they ever admitted. The late afternoon sun filtered through the curtains. Claire stood in the kitchen, drying dishes while the girls played nearby. Ethan, repairing a loose chair leg, glanced at her now and then. He had noticed it, the tension in her shoulders, how she stared at her phone too long, and how her eyes lingered on the girls' laughter like she was memorizing them. "He was overweight," Mick said, "not by much." She dried the last plate and turned. "I need to tell you something," she said, steady but quiet. Ethan stood, sensing a shift. "I didn't come here by accident," Claire said. "It was part of a condition, my father's. He's the CEO of Kensington Pharmaceuticals." Ethan blinked. "Hell wanted me to prove I understood the value of real life, real work. Before I could take over, I had to live like everyone else, take a normal job." "So this was a test?" he asked. voice flat. Claire nodded, at first, but, "A test," he repeated, sharper. "Some kind of social experiment?" "No," she said quickly. "Yes, that's how it started. But it stopped being that. I didn't expect to find this. You. Them." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I stayed because I wanted to," she added, stepping forward. "I chose this." He looked away, eyes cold. "So you were pretending the whole time?" "I wasn't," she whispered. "Every story, every braid, every panic over spilled juice, that was real. They made it real." "But you lied to me." Claire's lips trembled. "I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you without losing it all. I've never had this before." His voice dropped. "Neither have I. And now, I don't know what any of it meant." She looked at him through tears. "I'm sorry." Ethan said nothing. Claire turned, brushing the doorway. "I'll get my things." He didn't stop her. That silence hurt more than shouting ever could. From the hallway, two small figures crouched behind the bedroom door. Lily clutched Mia's hand. Both had heard everything. Claire walked past them with a weak smile. She knelt down. "I'll see you again soon, okay?" Mia opened her mouth, but Claire stood, too fast, and walked away. Her steps faded down the hall. The door clicked shut behind her. Ethan stood alone in the kitchen, staring at where she had stood. "That's what happens when people like her pretend to care," he muttered bitterly. A small voice broke the quiet. She didn't pretend. Mia stood in the doorway, cheeks streaked with tears, fists clenched. "She's our real Claire," she cried. Lily appeared beside her, lip trembling. "She makes up stories about magic animals," Lily said. "She reads even when she's tired." "She stayed with me when I was sick," Mia added. "She braided her hair and kissed us goodnight." "She makes pancakes with chocolate chips," Lily whispered. "Even when you forget, Daddy." Ethan knelt slowly. The girls ran into his arms, burying their faces in his chest. He held them tightly, and in that moment he realized what he'd done, not just to Claire, but to them. He'd guarded his heart so fiercely, he'd forgotten theirs were wide open. Children didn't love carefully, they loved fully and fast. He closed his eyes, unsure what hurt more, the sense of betrayal or the thought that maybe he was the one who had failed. Upstairs, Claire sat alone, folding the few clothes she'd brought. She wiped her face with her sleeve. She hadn't expected forgiveness, but she had hoped for understanding. Now, all she had was silence. Lily sat at the kitchen table with her tongue poking out between her lips, focusing hard. Mia scribbled next to her with a purple crayon, her little hand moving in uneven strokes across the page. Claire had been gone for 3 days. 3 very long, very quiet days. Ethan had done his best. More bedtime stories, pancakes for dinner, even letting the girls jump on the couch once, but the house still felt too still. The laughter was gone. The rhythm they didn't realize they had built, gone with her. Mia set her crayon down and frowned. "Do you think he'll even read it?" Lily nodded confidently. "He's a grown-up. Grown-ups read letters." Together, they folded the paper carefully and slid it into an envelope. With Ethan's help, they addressed it in bold block letters. "Mr. Robert Kensington, CEO of Kensington Pharmaceuticals." Then they mailed it. In Manhattan, the envelope, colorful, crayon-covered, and slightly smudged, made its way through the marble lobby of Kensington HQ. Normally, Robert Kensington ignored anything not typed and signed by someone in a suit. But this one was different. It said, "Very important," in purple ink. So, instead of handing it off, he opened it. "Dear Mr. Kensington, we don't know about business, but Claire made us breakfast, read us stories, and held our hands when we were scared. She's not pretending. She's our family. From Mia and Lily." He read it again. And again. He was simple, honest, so utterly human. And it stopped him in a way no board report ever had. The next morning, without telling anyone, not even Claire, he instructed his driver to head 2 hours north. In a small town park, Claire stood beneath a leafy tree, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled into a low braid. Before her sat 6 neighborhood kids on a blanket, eyes wide with attention. Courtesy, he stepped back, pretending. She pointed to a drawing of a heart. "So what do we do when we feel our hearts beating too fast?" "Breathe," one child said. "Like a dragon," another added, puffing out their cheeks. Claire laughed. "Exactly. Big dragon breaths to help us feel safe again." It was part of a free health class she'd started. Simple, heartfelt, and unadvertised. She hadn't told Ethan. She hadn't told her father. It just felt right. Like her. From a distance, behind the tree line, 2 men stood in silence. Robert Kensington and Ethan Walker. Ethan hadn't planned to stop. He'd been driving by when he caught a glimpse of Claire's golden braid in the breeze. Something in him told him to park and stay. He watched her, gentle, calm, present. Not the woman from the corporate world she had confessed about. Not the daughter trying to meet a father's impossible expectations. Just Claire. And for the first time, Ethan saw her clearly. After the session, Claire packed up her flip chart and supplies. Tucked under her arm was something small, Mia's stuffed unicorn. She had found it earlier that morning, wedged under the couch. She could have mailed it or dropped it off later, but something tugged at her to go now. So she walked up the porch steps and knocked. The door opened almost instantly. Ethan stood there like he had been waiting. Claire held out the toy. "Mia left this," she said softly. He took it, their fingers brushing. Neither of them said anything at first. Claire turned to go. "I saw you," Ethan said. She stopped. "At the park," he added. "You didn't come here to explain." "No," Claire said. "I just couldn't keep something that mattered to her." Ethan looked down at the unicorn, then back at Claire. Her eyes were tired, but clear. Her coat was too thin for the wind, and her braid had come loose. But she looked real, unpolished, honest. "You stayed when she was sick," he said. "You braided their hair. You made them laugh. That wasn't part of the test, was it?" Claire shook her head. "It was the part I chose." There was a long pause. Then he nodded, slowly, almost to himself. They stood there, 2 people on either side of a threshold. Both changed. Both softened. Still cautious, but no longer closed off. For the first time, Ethan's eyes misted, not from anger, not even from grief, but from something quieter. Recognition. Understanding. Maybe forgiveness. Claire didn't try to fill the silence. And Ethan didn't ask her to. Sometimes the most important things are said without words. The house smelled like cinnamon and melted chocolate. Claire stood at the counter, helping Mia crack an egg into a mixing bowl, while Lily stirred the dry ingredients with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Ethan was beside them, rolling dough with a wine bottle. They still did not own a proper rolling pin, and stealing glances at Claire when she was not looking. It had been a slow return. No grand declarations, no dramatic apologies, just quiet dinners, little smiles. One night of Claire dropping off a book for the girls, then another night of staying for tea. Until, finally, Ethan had said, "Stay for dinner tomorrow. The girls are requesting your presence," strongly, and she had. Now they were baking cookies for no reason other than the fact that Mia had announced, "It's a cookie emergency." Lily licked some batter off her finger and looked up at Ethan. "Daddy? Can we keep her?" Ethan froze. Claire looked up too, her cheeks flushed pink, but not from the oven. "Like forever?" Mia added. "Like adopt her into our house?" Ethan cleared his throat. That's not really how grown-ups work, sweetheart. But she fits, Lily said simply. Like a puzzle piece. Claire reached out, gently taking Ethan's hand. I failed my test, she said, softly but clearly. But I found what I really want. Not a company, a family. Ethan looked down at her hand in his, then at the girls, flower in their hair, joy in their eyes, and nodded once. I think you passed the right test. The moment was warm, light, almost magical, until a knock came at the door. Ethan wiped his hands on a towel and opened it, only to stop cold. Standing on the porch in a dark overcoat, his silver hair neatly combed, was Robert Kensington, Claire's father. Claire stepped beside Ethan, stunned. Dad? Robert looked at her, then at Ethan, then past them into the kitchen, where the girls were peeking around the corner. I was in the neighborhood, Robert said dryly. 2 hours out of my way. Did someone send you the cookie emergency memo? Claire asked, voice cautious but trying to be light. I got another kind of memo, he said, holding up a folded piece of paper. Ethan's heart skipped. It was the letter, the girl's letter. Robert looked at Ethan. His expression was unreadable. I thought I was preparing my daughter to lead a company, he said slowly. That was my failure, because what she found was something far more difficult, more necessary. Ethan braced himself for judgment, for disapproval, for some cold insult disguised as a compliment. The compliment, but Robert's voice softened. I used to think I needed a CEO, he said, eyes fixed on Ethan. But maybe what this world needs is more fathers like you. Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond. Claire stepped closer to her father. Does this mean? Robert gave a small nod. The board is yours when you're ready. But only if you want it. Claire's eyes welled up. And if I don't? She asked. Then you still won, he said. It was the first time in years he had said something to her that did not sound like a demand or an instruction. Just truth. Claire smiled, stepped forward, and hugged him. Not stiffly, not out of obligation, but with real, quiet love. That night, after the girls had gone to bed with bellies full of cookies and faces sticky with chocolate, Ethan and Claire sat on the back porch with 2 mugs of tea. He looked at her, silhouetted in the soft glow of the porch light, and said, You really failed that test, huh? Claire grinned. Spectacularly. Ethan chuckled. Glad you did. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Me too. There were no titles out here, no boardrooms, no legacy to protect. Just 2 people, a porch, and a couple of kids upstairs who believed in family more than any adult ever dared to. An imperfect family, perhaps, but a real one. The smell of vanilla and browned butter filled the kitchen. Sunlight poured through the windows in warm stripes as Ethan flipped pancakes with quiet focus. Mia and Lily stood on chairs beside him, aprons trailing the floor. One had Claire scribbled across the front in crayon. Chocolate chips ready? Ethan asked. Ready? Strawberries sliced? Ready? Secret message? In progress? Ethan drizzled maple syrup onto the top pancake, forming shaky but heartfelt letters. Will you be our forever? Mia clapped. She's gonna cry. Happy tears, Lily whispered. They carried the tray together, twins leading the way, Ethan behind them. Claire sat on the porch swing, barefoot, sipping tea, her hair in a messy braid, wrapped in one of Ethan's old flannel shirts. She smiled as soon as she saw them. Special delivery, Ethan said. Claire's eyes fell on the plate. She read the syrup, words, once, twice. Her lips parted. A tear rolled down her cheek, then another. She covered her mouth, nodded, and whispered, Yes, yes, I will. The girls squealed and wrapped their arms around her. Ethan set the tray down, kissed her hair, and pulled something from his hoodie pocket. Oh, and you might want this. It was a plain cardboard box wrapped in a crooked ribbon. Claire opened it slowly. Inside were her flats, the same ones ruined with orange juice the first day, now scrubbed clean, stitched at the seam. Tucked between them, a simple silver ring. Claire let out a soft laugh. "You kept them?" Ethan shrugged, figured, maybe one day you'd want to remember how it started. "I never forgot," she said, "not even for a second." The wedding was small, no hall, no orchestra, no glittering gown. Just their backyard, wildflowers and jars, chairs borrowed from neighbors, and 2 flower girls who insisted on also being ring bearers. Claire wore a soft cream dress, hair down, feet bare. Transparency pucks sang from both shoulders. Ethan wore the same shirt he'd worn for Pancake Day, the one she said made him look dangerously domestic. They stood beneath a wooden arch strung with fairy lights, hands clasped, eyes full. Lily and Mia passed them the rings with solemn little faces, then burst into giggles when Claire winked. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," the girls shouted, "Ee-way!" and everyone laughed. As they walked back through petals tossed in the air, Claire looked back at the crowd, then forward toward the home where everything began. The worn kitchen chairs, the messy lawn, the girls chasing butterflies, and the man who once believed nothing could surprise him, again. Everything had changed. In the final scene, Claire's voice narrates over soft piano. "I was supposed to prove I could lead a company, but I learned something better: how to love a family and be loved back. In the end, it wasn't the money or the title or the legacy that mattered. It was this: pancakes, sticky hands, forgiveness. A backyard wedding. A life, a little messy, but more than enough." And that was the story of single dad hired a babysitter for his twin daughters, unaware she was the CEO's daughter in disguise. A journey of love, healing, and unexpected family. If it touched your heart, subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more emotional and inspiring tales. And don't forget to tap the hype button to support more stories that truly matter. Thanks for watching. Stay kind, stay open. You never know who might walk into your life and change everything.
Just a few days after her father passed away, the poor little girl was cursed at by her stepmother and the woman's lover, who threw her school bag and clothes out onto the gate. Dressed in a torn green dress, her braids messy, her tearful eyes filled with despair, the girl knelt down and begged hopelessly. At that very moment, a millionaire suddenly appeared and froze in shock at the sight, only managing to utter one sentence that left the entire crowd speechless. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below and let me know which city you are watching from. Let's get started. That afternoon in Birmingham, Alabama, the sky was covered in a pale gray. There was no rain, no sun, only a heavy layer of clouds pressing down, making the funeral atmosphere even more suffocating. Inside the small funeral home of the local church, rows of chairs were neatly arranged. Flickering candlelight reflected on the faces of those who had come, some filled with sorrow, others with curiosity. In the center of the room rested a polished wooden casket. On top of it stood a framed picture of Michael Jenkins, his gentle smile unchanged, in stark contrast to the silence of the body inside. Michael had passed away at the age of 43 after a sudden illness, leaving behind an irreplaceable void for his 6-year-old daughter and for everyone who had known him. Elena Jenkins sat in the front row. The little girl was frail and small, swallowed up by the oversized black dress she wore. In her arms, she clutched a worn-out teddy bear, its glass eyes dulled by dust and time. Elena stared quietly at the casket, her lips trembling, unable to form words. Beside her sat Clara Collins, Elena's new stepmother, a 38-year-old woman with carefully applied makeup, In her hand, she held a silk handkerchief, dabbing her eyes from time to time as if to prove she was grieving, though her eyes were dry. When the pastor's prayer paused, Elena slowly rose to her feet. Her small hand trembled as she lifted the teddy bear. Step by step, she moved toward the casket. Her voice was faint, but just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Daddy will be cold without this teddy bear." Her tiny hand reached out to place the bear on the casket lid, but before it touched the wood, another hand seized her wrist and yanked it down. "That's enough, Elena," Clara whispered, her tone sharp and cold. "Don't embarrass yourself in front of everyone." Startled, Elena looked up at her stepmother. Clara's blue eyes showed not the slightest trace of compassion. Across from the casket stood Victor Miller, a man in his 40s wearing a dark suit, his arms folded. The corner of his mouth curled into a mocking smile, a fleeting sneer that cut into Elena like a blade. Frightened, she stepped back, clutching the teddy bear tightly against her chest, whispering through tears, "I just don't want Daddy to be cold." Clara immediately released her wrist, quickly lowering her head and pressing the handkerchief to her eyes so the crowd would see only a grieving widow. But when she lifted her gaze again, her eyes locked with Victor's, and a flash of secret understanding passed between them. Tilting her head slightly toward him, she murmured in a voice so low only he could hear, "One more step, and everything will be ours." Victor gave the slightest nod, saying nothing, his fingers tightening around the glass in his hand. At the back of the room, Richard Thompson, a 45-year-old millionaire, stood silently. Dressed in a simple black suit, his strong face was marked with fatigue. Richard had been Michael's close friend for many years, the two of them side by side since the struggles of their early careers. He knew how deeply Michael loved his daughter. Now, as he watched Elena pulled away from the casket, the light in her young eyes extinguished like a flame doused with water, Richard felt a sharp ache in his chest. "Michael, don't worry. I will keep an eye on the little girl." But why do her eyes look so sad, as if she already knows she has just lost her entire world? On the right side of the pews, Evelyn Thompson, a 70-year-old longtime neighbor, leaned over and whispered to the woman sitting next to her, "Clara doesn't look the least bit sorrowful, and that poor child is trembling like a tiny kitten." The other woman nodded and sighed. "Poor thing. Only 6 years old and already lost her father. I don't see any grief in that woman, except for adjusting her dress and wiping away the smudge in her lipstick." Evelyn fell silent, her gaze fixed on Elena. Many times she had caught Clara scolding the child, but she never thought this day would come so soon. The service ended. People slowly began to leave. Clara stood at the door, shaking hands with each guest, her expression the perfect mask of grief, yet her steps were lighter than those of someone leaving a banquet. Victor stood close by, occasionally leaning down to whisper something that made her laugh softly, which she quickly covered with a shake of the head, pretending to be mournful again. Elena was left behind in the wide room, alone with her stuffed bear. She climbed onto a chair, stared one last time at her father's portrait, then buried her face in her hands, sobbing. Clara's footsteps echoed steadily on the wooden floor, then faded into silence. When night fell, the house grew still. Elena sat wide-eyed in her small room. She clutched the bear tightly against her chest, listening to every sound drifting in from the living room. Clara's voice rose, hoarse yet calculating. "Everything will be fine, as long as no one discovers that will." Victor's voice followed, low and sharp. "Don't worry. The papers are ready. The little girl can't do anything." Elena sank down, her heart pounding. She didn't fully understand the meaning of the word will, but she knew very well there was something chilling in their voices. Her small eyes stared into the darkness as she whispered to her stuffed bear, "Daddy, I'm so scared. I'm afraid they will take everything, even this house." From the living room came Victor's faint laugh, drawn out and icy, like a blade cutting through the night. Elena pressed her face into the bear's fur, her tears soaking the fabric. In that moment, the 6-year-old girl felt, with heartbreaking clarity, that she was completely alone in the house that had once been filled with love. In the days following the funeral, the Jenkins house was cloaked in a chilling silence. Elena shut herself away in her small room, clutching her teddy bear against her chest, her eyes vacant. Since her father's death, She felt as if she had slipped into another world, one where every step she took trembled with fear. Clara paced through the house in high heels, the sharp clatter echoing off the walls, each sound making Elena flinch. That morning, the sky was gray, heavy with black clouds, though no rain fell. Clara wore a tight red dress, her lips painted a striking crimson, every feature of her face sharpened with makeup. She stood in the living room, opened her jewelry box, and suddenly shrieked, her voice so high-pitched it rattled the entire house. "Where's my diamond necklace?" Elena stepped out of her room in confusion. She wore a faded mint blue dress, the shoulder torn, the hem frayed. Her hair, hastily braided days before, had unraveled into messy strands. Her wide brown eyes had no time to grasp what was happening before Clara lunged forward, jabbing a finger at her face. "You filthy little wretch, just one look at you is enough to see your thieving nature. You're a thief. I saw your eyes on it these past few days. Don't deny it." Elena shook her head frantically, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't do it. I never touched your things." At that very moment, Victor Miller stepped out of the kitchen. He wore a dark blue suit, a glass of red wine in hand, moving slowly, as if he were savoring a play. He leaned back on the sofa, his eyes mocking as they fixed on Elena. "What child isn't greedy?" Victor sneered, dragging out each word. "Anything that shines, they want to grab. Just look at her, crying as if she's innocent, while her hands are probably hiding it somewhere." Clara stormed forward, seizing Elena's small arm and shaking her roughly. "Confess, or do you want me to tear your room apart and drag you out in front of the neighbors? Once you're exposed, you'll never lift your head again for the rest of your life." Elena broke down in sobs, clutching her teddy bear tight to her chest. "I didn't take it. I never took it," Victor burst out laughing, swirling the wine in his glass. "Just look at her face, exactly the kind of child who cheats and lies. Michael must be ashamed in his grave to have left behind a daughter like this." At the mention of her father's name, Elena gasped as though stabbed in the heart. She dropped to her knees, crying uncontrollably. "Daddy, I didn't steal, I swear." Clara flung her hand and strode quickly up the stairs. Just a few minutes later, she dragged down an old, worn school bag. "This is all you have. A thief like you has no place in this house," Clara shouted, her eyes icy cold. She shoved hard, and Elena tumbled helplessly onto the yard. The school bag burst open, books and clothes scattering across the damp ground. Elena sat on the dirt, trembling as she clutched her stuffed bear, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Daddy, where am I supposed to go now?" Her voice was faint, dissolving into the wind. At that very moment, a black car stopped in front of the gate. Richard Thompson stepped out, his heart still heavy after the funeral. For days he had wrestled with unease, wondering if Elena was being cared for or abandoned. That was why he had come to this house today. But as soon as he entered the yard, the first sight that met his eyes was Elena sitting on the ground, her belongings tossed around her, Clara standing in the doorway with folded arms, and Victor sipping liquor with a sinister smile. The scene struck him silent, his guilt instantly igniting into fury. "Clara, what are you doing?" Richard's deep voice thundered across the quiet yard. Clara turned, her face showing no trace of remorse, only a slight curl of her lips. "I'm protecting the honor of this family from a little thief. She stole my diamond ring. I can't keep her here." Elena lifted her tear-filled eyes toward Richard, then rushed forward to clutch at his leg, her voice trembling. "Uncle Richard, I didn't take anything, I swear." Richard bent down, gently lifting Elena into his arms. He held her tight against his chest, feeling her frail body trembling like a leaf. Then he raised his head, his eyes sharp as blades fixed on Clara. "If Michael were still alive, what would he see in you today?" Clara faltered for a second, then quickly straightened, her voice shrill. "What do you know? I have to protect our reputation. This girl is not worthy of the Jenkins name." Victor burst into laughter, his tone mocking. "Take her if you want, Richard. But remember this. Sooner or later, she'll come crawling back here to suffer all the same." Richard said nothing. He only tightened his hold on Elena and turned to leave. His gaze was like steel, so cold and unyielding that Clara could not hide her rising fury. From the porch, Clara screamed after him, her voice hissing through clenched teeth. "Go then. But remember, no one escapes my shadow." Richard paused for a brief moment, then strode quickly toward the gate. Elena buried her face in his chest, her muffled sobs beating in rhythm with his heavy heart. He carried Elena away from that house, while behind them Clara's hateful glare and Victor's wicked smile lingered like a darkness that refused to fade. The car glided silently down the road. The only sounds inside were Elena's ragged breathing and the muffled sobs that broke from her chest. Richard held her tightly in his arms, feeling her small body tremble like a lost fledgling. She buried her face against his chest, her sobs catching in uneven bursts. Richard said nothing. He only rested his hand on her tangled hair and gently stroked it, the way Michael once did with his own daughter. The road to the Thompson estate was deserted. The street lights cast a pale glow on Elena's wan face, her wide eyes fixed on the window, yet the reflection staring back was only that of a child in a tattered mint-green dress, her braids undone and messy. She whispered softly, unsure if Richard could even hear her. "I didn't steal. Daddy knows I didn't steal." Richard heard every word, and his chest tightened with pain. He gave no reply, only reached out to adjust the coat draped over her shoulders, trying to keep a trace of warmth around her in the bleak night. The gates of the Thompson estate swung open, and the car came to a stop. The house loomed beneath the yard lights, its gray stone walls and steep roof casting shadows, the windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes. To Elena, it looked no different from a cold, unwelcoming castle. She clutched her teddy bear tightly, her hand trembling as she stepped out of the car. Richard bent down, speaking gently. "Don't worry, Elena. From now on, you'll stay here with me." The great door opened wide. In the doorway sat a boy in a wheelchair. His dark eyes, framed by thick lashes, flicked toward them for an instant before he quickly turned away. This was Max Thompson, 8 years old, Richard's only son. His legs lay motionless and thin upon the footrest. His brown hair fell over his forehead, his face handsome yet cold as stone. Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Max, this is Elena. She'll be living with us for a while." Max didn't look at Elena. His lips curled faintly, his voice rough and clipped. "Whatever you want, Father. I don't need anyone." Elena flinched at his words, but forced herself to smile and bowed her head politely. "Hello, my name is Elena." Max spun his wheelchair, turning his back as the wheels screeched harshly against the wooden floor. Elena froze in place, clutching her teddy bear tighter. Richard sighed, his eyes following his son. Then he bent to gently pat Elena's head. "Don't take it to heart. He didn't mean it." Elena nodded faintly, though her tear-rimmed eyes betrayed the sting of rejection she felt. Dinner was served in the vast dining hall. A long table draped in white linen stretched beneath the soft glow of the crystal chandelier, yet the air was so heavy that each breath seemed weighted with unease. Richard sat at the head of the table, Elena to his right, Max to his left. The servants brought in the dishes, then withdrew in silence, leaving the three of them facing one another in wordless stillness. Richard ladled a bowl of hot soup for Elena, his voice softening. "Eat, Elena. You need your strength." Elena nodded, lifting her spoon carefully. She glanced up at Max. The boy only pushed a piece of meat around with his fork, never bringing it to his mouth. His eyes lowered, showing no interest in the food. Elena watched for a moment, then summoned all her courage. She picked up a small piece of bread, gently set it on Max's plate, and forced a faint smile. "Here, take it. I'm full." Max looked up, his eyes sharp as a blade. He swatted the bread off his plate, his voice like ice. "I don't need anyone's pity." The sound echoed through the wide room, bouncing against the stone walls. Elena flinched, her lips trembling. She lowered her head until her messy hair covered her tear-filled eyes. Her small hand gripped the stuffed animal on the chair beside her, clinging to it as if it were her last safe place. Richard set down his knife and fork, wanting to speak, but unable to find his voice. His throat tightened. He looked at his son, his gaze heavy, then turned to Elena, who sat in silence, enduring. With a long sigh, he resumed eating, letting the weight of the moment crush all three of them. Night enveloped the mansion. Richard sat alone in his study, papers scattered in front of him, though his eyes were blank. His wife's death had slowly built a wall between him and Max, and now Elena's presence seemed to make that wall even higher. A faint noise from downstairs pulled him out of his thoughts. Richard rose and walked slowly down the stairs. In the living room, Elena curled up on the sofa, clutching her stuffed bear. The table lamp cast a warm glow across her small face, her eyes swollen and red. She whispered, her voice broken by tears. "Daddy, I miss you. I miss you so much." Richard froze behind her, his chest tightening. He longed to go to her, to hold her, to say something comforting, but his legs felt too heavy. He knew the pain of losing a father could not be healed with a few words. Upstairs, a door opened softly. Max stood in the hallway, his shadow stretching across the floor. He heard every choked sob from Elena, his eyes flickering, his face stiff. For a moment, it seemed as if he might wheel himself closer, but instead, he shut the door. The faint click of the lock sounded like an ending. Richard looked up, catching the image. He stopped on the stairs, his gaze fixed on that closed door. A wave of guilt pressed down on him, heavy as stone. I lost my wife, and now even my son drifts farther away. Am I repeating the same mistake, letting both of these children slip through my hands? The house sank into silence, broken only by Elena's muffled sobs and the steady ticking of the clock piercing the night. The next morning, lazy sunlight slipped through the window frame, sneaking in between the half-closed curtains. The Thompson mansion stood silent like a block of stone in the wealthy neighborhood. Elena tiptoed out of the guest room. She walked barefoot, clutching a worn-out teddy bear, her eyes still swollen after a night of crying for her father. A faint clattering sound came from the second-floor hallway. Elena lifted her gaze and saw Max sitting in his wheelchair. He had been up since early morning, his face expressionless, his hands resting on the rims of the wheels without the slightest movement. Elena froze for a moment, hesitation washing over her. She knew Max disliked talking, but this silence felt heavier than Clara's scolding ever had. She drew a breath, held her teddy bear tighter, and spoke up. "Do you want to hear me tell a story about my dad?" Max didn't turn around. His eyes stayed fixed on the window at the end of the hall, where the morning light spilled across the wooden floor in a golden streak. Elena bit her lip, mustering more courage. "My dad used to say, a signature is something no one can fake. Because a signature is like a person's soul." The wheels beneath Max's hands trembled. His fingers tightened, his knuckles trembling slightly. But he still gave no reply. Elena lowered her head to look at the teddy bear and whispered, "He always told me to remember little things like that. I want to remember everything, because I'm afraid I'll forget my father's voice." At that moment, Richard stepped out of his study. He froze when he caught Elena's words. His eyes shifted from the small girl struggling to speak to his silent, withdrawn son. A soft ache welled in his chest, yet Richard chose silence. He simply walked on, carefully closing the door behind him, as if leaving space for the two children to share their own moment. Meanwhile, in a lavish hotel downtown, Clara sat before a mirror, brushing her golden hair, her fiery red dress glowing in the midday light. Victor, wearing a blue suit, poured red wine into a glass and leaned back in his chair. His voice was low, but every word cut through his teeth like a hiss. "Richard has started paying attention. He isn't stupid. If he goes through the documents, everything will soon come out." Clara stopped brushing her hair, her eyes in the mirror flashing with unease. She turned, set the comb down on the table and said, "Then we need to erase every trace. Anything that could be used as evidence must not be left behind." Victor took a sip of wine, then smirked, his eyes sharp as a blade. "Or simpler than that, if the little girl just disappeared, no one would ever be able to prove anything." Clara went silent for a moment, her lips pressed tightly together, then she spoke flatly. "As long as no one suspects me." The air in the luxurious room grew dense, but the words exchanged between the two accomplices carried the stench of gunpowder, ready to ignite. At nightfall, the atmosphere in the Thompson mansion grew heavy. Richard had already retired to his room. Elena lay curled up on the new bed, her eyes wide open in the darkness, unable to fall asleep. Max sat in his wheelchair in the upstairs hallway like a lonely shadow. He replayed Elena's words from that morning, especially the one about the signature. Each word pressed into his mind, refusing to leave. Max gripped the armrests of his chair, feeling both unsettled and confused. A faint sound from downstairs caught his attention. The front door opened and then shut quickly. Max held his breath and leaned forward to watch. A dim light from the lower hallway stretched upward, revealing the figure of a man. He moved quickly, almost in a rush, and disappeared into Michael Jenkins's old study, the room where Richard had kept many mementos. Max frowned. This was not one of the house servants, nor was it his father. He quietly pushed the wheels forward, his heart pounding harder. Through the narrow crack of the door, Max saw Victor clearly. He was ransacking the desk drawers, his movements hurried. His face was tense, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He pulled out a thick stack of files and stuffed them into his coat pocket. In his haste, a single sheet slipped from the pile and fell to the floor with a soft rustle. Max followed it with his eyes and immediately recognized the handwriting. A clumsy, stiff signature, lacking the fluidity he had seen so many times on the documents Elena's father had signed and hung in the hallway. Victor didn't notice, shutting the drawer quickly before leaving the room in a hurry. He had no idea someone had been watching in silence. Max sat frozen, cold sweat dampening his palms. His eyes never left the sheet of paper still lying on the wooden floor. Elena's words echoed loudly in his mind. Signatures are something no one can forge. The wheels moved slightly as Max rolled closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he had just witnessed a secret no one else was aware of. And that piece of paper could change everything. Max drew a deep breath, his darkened eyes fixed on the sheet resting on the floorboards. In the dim light, he felt with certainty that a new door had just opened, one leading to a truth capable of overturning everything. Max sat in his wheelchair, his breathing rapid, cold sweat breaking out across his skin. The hallway had gone quiet again, leaving only darkness and the pounding of his heartbeat. His eyes fell on the old study. The door left slightly ajar, a sheet of paper lying on the wooden floor like a secret calling to him. He rolled forward slowly, his trembling hand reaching out to pick it up. The moment he unfolded it, his eyes locked on the signature at the bottom. The handwriting was jagged, stiff, missing the smooth elegance he had seen before in the framed photographs of Michael Jenkins's signature that lined the hallway. Max bit his lip and quickly folded the paper. He wheeled himself back to his room, pulled open the desk drawer, shoved the sheet inside, and slammed it shut. A heavy weight settled in his chest. He didn't fully understand what it meant, but he was certain this wasn't just an ordinary document. He whispered to himself, his voice catching, "This will change everything." The next morning, pale light filtered through the curtains. Elena woke up still clutching her old stuffed bear. She tiptoed down the hall and noticed Max's door cracked open. Pushing it gently, she peeked inside. Max sat at his desk, his back hunched, his face tense. The drawer was slightly open, the corner of a white sheet peeking out. Elena stepped closer, her voice soft. "What are you doing?" Max startled, wheeling himself quickly to block the desk. "Don't touch it." But Elena's small hand darted forward, pulling the paper free. Her eyes widened as they scanned the words. She froze when she saw the signature at the bottom. Tears welled up, her voice trembling. This isn't my dad's handwriting. The signature is completely different. I knew it the moment I saw it." Max stayed silent, his face paling. After a pause, he spoke in a low voice, his eyes avoiding hers. "I only saw him take it from your father's study. I don't understand any of it. I just know he was in a hurry, and he left this behind." Elena clutched the paper tightly, her small hands shaking. She turned to Max, her eyes burning with fear and determination. "If we find the truth, you and Uncle Richard will believe me, won't you? That the story about me stealing never really happened." Max looked at those fragile hands, and for the first time, he felt a crack in the wall he had built around himself. He didn't answer, but his eyes had lost some of their coldness. The door burst open. Richard stepped in, holding a few folders in his hand. He froze when he saw Elena clutching a sheet of paper and Max sitting close to the desk, his face tense. Elena immediately held out the paper, her voice breathless. "Uncle Richard, I think this is a forged document. This signature, it isn't my father's." Richard moved closer and took the paper. He studied it carefully, every stroke, every line of ink. His eyes grew somber. He had watched Michael sign documents countless times. He knew by heart the fluid, decisive movements of his friend. But what lay before him now was nothing more than a poor imitation. Richard tightened his grip on the edge of the paper, whispering as if to himself, "Michael, you left me a trace." Max frowned, his voice hoarse. "Dad, what does this mean?" Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his tone slow yet resolute. "It means the truth is very close, and we cannot ignore it." Elena clutched the hem of his sleeve, whispering as though pleading, "Please, help me. Let everyone know I'm not a thief." Richard bent down, looking straight into her tearful eyes. He nodded, his voice deep yet warm. "I promise, Elena. I will bring everything to light." That afternoon, Richard sat in his study, the paper now secured inside a folder on his desk. He knew he needed a witness, someone who could confirm the truth. In his mind appeared the image of an elderly woman who had once lived next door to Michael. Evelyn Thompson, 70 years old, with silver hair, a bent back, yet eyes still sharp and memory keen. She lived alone in a small house with a garden full of roses. More than once, she had witnessed Clara mistreating Elena, but she had stayed silent, believing that family matters were not for outsiders to interfere in. Richard stood, put on his coat, and picked up the folder. He turned to Max and Elena. "You two stay here. I'm going to meet someone who may help us. A witness." Elena grabbed his hand, her eyes brimming. "Uncle Richard, please prove to everyone that I never stole anything." Richard bent down, gently smoothing her messy hair, his gaze firm but gentle. "I promise, the truth will be revealed, and no one will be able to deny it." The door closed behind Richard. He tightened his hold on the folder, determination rising within him. The next step was to find Evelyn Thompson, the one who could open the first door leading to the truth that had been hidden for so long. Richard's car rolled along the old cobblestone road, the tires crunching over dry leaves. The evening light cast a pale gray hue across the neighborhood. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes repeatedly flicking to the folder on the passenger seat. The forged paper inside seemed to burn through him, pushing him to seek the truth now. At the end of the street, a small house appeared. A trellis of climbing roses covered the wall, the flowers withered, yet still defiant. This was the home of Evelyn Thompson, a woman who had lived there for more than 40 years, witnessing generations grow up and move away. She had once been close with Michael and his wife, but since his death, she rarely left her house, living quietly among her garden. Richard stepped out of the car, walked up the stone path, took a deep breath, and knocked. After a few seconds, the wooden door opened, revealing Evelyn, a thin woman with her white hair neatly tied back. Her eyes were still bright, though they carried fatigue and caution. "Oh my, Richard Thompson. How long has it been since you last came by?" Her voice was hoarse, both surprised and wary. Richard nodded, clutching the folder against his chest. "Mrs. Evelyn, I'm here because of Elena. I need to speak with you." She frowned slightly but still opened the door. "Come in, but I'm not sure there's anything I can do to help you." The living room was small but tidy. Old family photos lined the walls, and on the table a teapot still steamed. Evelyn placed a cup of tea in front of him, then sat across, her frail hands trembling. "Richard, I'm old now. I don't want to get tangled up in messy things anymore. The less a person gets involved, the more peace they'll have." Richard looked straight into her eyes, his voice firm. "You saw Clara drive Elena out, didn't you? Your silence is the reason they keep going." The air grew heavy. Evelyn lowered her gaze, her fingers tapping lightly on the cup, and suddenly tears welled up. "There was one time, I saw the child sitting on the porch in the middle of winter, wearing only a thin dress, clutching a teddy bear. She was shaking like a baby bird fallen from its nest. I wanted to take her inside, but Clara rushed out and screamed, 'Don't meddle, old woman!' I stepped back. I was afraid of being dragged into their family business. And from that day on, I've never stopped regretting it." Richard clenched his fist, his voice sharpening. Michael trusted the wrong person, and now Elena bears the cost. But if we stay silent, the wicked will win forever. Evelyn, are you willing to tell what you witnessed? She covered her face, her shoulders trembling with sobs. After a long moment, she nodded, her voice choked. I will speak. I'll say everything, in court if I have to. I can't let that child live in injustice any longer. Richard exhaled deeply, as if a heavy stone had fallen from his chest. He knew he had just found a crucial piece of the puzzle. 2 days later, as Richard was reviewing files in his study, a knock came at the door. The butler announced that a woman wanted to see him. Richard stepped out and saw a small figure holding tightly to a cloth bag, her eyes hesitant. I'm Monica Brown. Her voice trembled. Richard recognized her instantly. Monica had once been a maid in Michael's household, disappearing not long before his death. And what brings you here to see me? Richard asked, his tone low. Monica bowed her head, her hands gripping the straps of her bag. Clara fired me, just because I gave Elena a bowl of hot soup. The child was shivering, so hungry she couldn't even lift a spoon. I couldn't bear it, so I brought it to her. Clara caught me, shouted in my face that I had overstepped my duties. The next day, I lost my job. She lifted her gaze, her eyes brimming with tears. I've kept silent too long, but when I heard that Elena had been thrown out onto the street, my heart broke. I can't stay quiet any longer. I'm ready to speak, ready to testify. Richard stepped closer, laying a heavy hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. Thank you, Monica. Your words will be an important part of exposing the truth. No one has the right to destroy a child. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. While Richard gathered testimonies, at Michael's mansion, Clara suddenly noticed something wrong. She opened a drawer in the old study, reaching for a familiar file. But only emptiness remained. Her hand shook as she held her wine glass. Crack. The glass shattered, red wine splattering across the wooden floor. Victor! Clara screamed, her voice ripping through the air. Victor rushed in, frowning. What's going on? Clara pointed at the drawer, her eyes blazing. The files, they're gone. Someone took them. Someone is digging up our graves. Victor froze, then clenched his fists tight. His gaze darkened, his voice low and filled with menace. If anyone dares to reopen this, we must strike first. Clara's furious scream and Victor's cold stare signaled a confrontation that could no longer be avoided. The truth had just begun to surface, but the shadows were already moving, ready to swallow everything. The next morning, Richard walked into the office of a man he had known for years, Jonathan Harris, a renowned inheritance lawyer in the city. Mr. Harris was in his early 50s, his salt and pepper hair and silver-rimmed glasses giving weight to his stern face. His office was bright, with shelves lined from end to end with legal documents. Richard placed a folder on the desk and pushed it toward him. I need a definite answer. Is this Michael's signature? Or just a forgery? Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses, picked up a magnifying glass, and studied every stroke with meticulous care. He compared the questioned signature against the genuine documents Richard had brought along, papers Michael had signed when he was alive. The silence grew so deep that Richard could hear the clock ticking second by second. Finally, Mr. Harris looked up, his voice firm. There's no doubt about it. This is a forgery. The handwriting is shaky, inconsistent. The pressure is nothing like the real signature. Whoever did this may have thought they could fool outsiders, but to an expert, it's a clumsy copy. Richard nodded, clenching his fist. He whispered, as if speaking to his departed friend, Michael, the truth is finally coming to light. At the same time, in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, Monica Brown sat across from Clara. Monica wore an old coat, both hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, her face tense and worn. Clara, on the other hand, looked polished and sharp in a tight red dress, her voice dripping like honey laced with venom. How much to keep you quiet? Clara leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. A new apartment? A monthly allowance? You just need to disappear. Stay silent, and I promise you'll never have to worry about where your next meal comes from. Monica trembled. Tears slid down her cheeks as she shook her head. You can't always buy a conscience, Mrs. Clara. I've kept silent too long. I saw Elena being abused, being starved. I can't turn away anymore." Clara smirked coldly, setting her purse down on the table, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You're digging your own grave, Monica. Think carefully what matters more, some vague notion of justice, or your very life." Monica didn't answer. She stood, walked quickly out of the cafe. Her hands were still trembling, but her eyes carried a resolve stronger than ever before. That evening, just as Richard returned to the mansion, the phone on his desk rang. He picked it up. On the other end was a man's voice, low and distorted. "Mr. Thompson, you're putting the girl in danger." Richard gripped the receiver. "Who are you?" A dry laugh came back through the line. "If you keep going, you'll lose her. Elena will vanish from this world as if she never existed." The call cut off, leaving only the cold, steady drone of the dial tone. Richard's fist tightened, fury blazing in his eyes. He knew Victor had begun to move. Meanwhile, Elena wandered the dark hallway of the old mansion. She pressed her ear against a half-closed door and heard familiar voices. It was Clara's, sharp and scheming. "If we don't stop Richard, the girl will expose us. She has to be silenced or disappear." Victor answered with a chilling laugh. "Leave it to me. A 6-year-old child. Far easier than Mr. Thompson." Elena covered her mouth, tears spilling over. She spun and ran, her small heart pounding. She burst into Max's room, grabbed his hand, her voice trembling yet fierce. "I won't let them take our family away again. Never." Max looked at her, seeing an unexpected strength shining in her eyes. He didn't reply right away, but he squeezed her hand tighter, a silent promise. Late that night, Richard sat in his study. The phone rang again. This time, the screen clearly showed the caller's name, Clara Jenkins. He picked up, his voice hoarse with anger. "What do you want?" On the other end, Clara's tone was sweet, yet cruel. "If you take one more step, Elena will disappear. Forever." Richard shot to his feet, his hand clutching the receiver so tightly his knuckles turned white. His chest felt crushed by an iron grip, yet his eyes burned with unshakable determination. Clara's call was like a blade slicing through the night. The battle between darkness and light had entered its most dangerous threshold, where every choice could cost the life of a child. The car rolled down the long paved road, the rows of streetlights casting a dim yellow glow. Inside, Elena leaned against Richard's shoulder, her eyes dry but clutching the worn teddy bear so tightly it seemed she could barely breathe. Max sat silently in the back seat, his hand resting on the wheelchair as if to steady himself. No one spoke, only the rumble of the engine mixed with the wind lashing against the windows. Richard gripped the steering wheel, his mind strung tight as a wire. Clara's threat still echoed in his head. "If you take one more step, Elena will disappear. Forever." He knew she never joked. That was why he had no choice but to take the two children somewhere safer. Their destination was a modest wooden house tucked near the pine forest on the outskirts of town. The door opened, and Daniel Miller stepped out. He was an old friend, once a military doctor on the battlefield, now retired. Daniel was tall, his hair streaked with gray, yet his stance was firm. His eyes, stern yet warm, carried a rare sense of trust. "Richard," Daniel frowned slightly when he saw the children. "What could have brought you here with them in the middle of the night?" Richard placed a hand on his shoulder and said simply, "They need shelter, and you're the only one I trust." Daniel nodded, pushing the door wide. "Then come in. It's safer here than anywhere in the city." Elena looked up at him, her voice soft but determined. "Sir, are you sure they won't find me here?" Daniel bent down to meet her gaze, his tone steady. "As long as I'm here, no one will ever touch you." Those words settled over Elena's small heart like a thin blanket. She nodded, took Max's hand, and pulled him inside. Max said nothing, but the tension in his eyes eased just a little. Meanwhile, at the Jenkins mansion, crystal chandeliers blazed against the polished marble floors. Clara stepped into the center of the hall, draped in a sparkling emerald gown, her smile radiant. She had arranged a lavish party, inviting businessmen, lawyers, and a roster of society's most prominent names. To Clara, it was all theater, a layer of paint to cover the cracks spreading underneath. The Jenkins family is still standing strong. Nothing has changed, Clara said sweetly to her guests. Michael left me a family and a legacy. All I want is to keep it in peace. Applause rang out, glasses clinked, but behind that false stage, Victor was already moving. He slipped quietly into Michael's old study. The firelight flickered across his sharp features. One by one, folders and files were tossed into the flames. The fire devoured the words, leaving nothing but ash. Victor smirked, whispering as if to the night itself, "No one will ever find anything. It's all in the past now." Amid the music and the shallow handshakes, Richard suddenly appeared. His deep blue suit made him stand out, each step slow but full of authority. Every guest turned to look, whispers rippling across the hall. Clara flinched for a brief moment, then quickly forced a charming smile. "Richard," she lifted her glass of wine, her voice dripping with honey. "You came at just the right time. Let's share a toast. We're still family after all." Richard did not raise a glass. He stood tall, his eyes locked on her, his deep voice thundering through the hall. "I did not come to celebrate. I came to bid you farewell. Very soon, you will stand before a court of law." The murmurs grew louder. Some guests awkwardly set their glasses down, while others stared at Clara with suspicion. Clara kept smiling, but her lips trembled slightly. She stepped closer to Richard, her voice dropping low, hissing through her teeth. "You're playing with fire, and I can put it out anytime I want." Richard's eyes never wavered. Each word he spoke cut like a blade. "The fire of truth, Clara. No one can extinguish it." The air inside the crowded hall felt as if it had been compressed, but Clara quickly turned back to the guests, raising her glass high, her laughter ringing bright. "Don't mind us, everyone. Just a small misunderstanding within the family." Inside the wooden house by the forest, Max sat silently by the window. Outside, the night stretched endless, only the moonlight slipping through the cracks of the shutters. Elena approached, placed her hand on the wheel of his chair, and whispered, "Are you afraid, Max?" Max turned his face away, his voice choked. "If Uncle Richard fails, they'll steal everything from us again. This family will disappear." Elena shook her head firmly, her eyes shining with a rare determination for a 6-year-old. "Number. My father always said, a signature cannot be forged. The truth will speak for itself. I believe in that. You must believe too." Max looked at her, unsettled by her conviction. He had grown used to fear and loss, but in Elena's eyes he saw a light he had long forgotten. Late that night, when most of the guests had gone, Richard quietly slipped down a dark hallway. He knew he had to find the place where Michael once kept his medical records. The old room reeked of dust and ashes, but after searching, Richard found a blue folder hidden deep at the bottom of a drawer. He opened it. Inside were blood test results, prescriptions, and detailed medical notes. His eyes scanned each line, his heartbeat quickening. The pills Michael had used to keep his heart steady had been swapped for a drug that did the opposite, driving his heart into failure. Richard staggered. His hand trembled as he clutched the folder. His throat tightened, but a broken whisper escaped his lips. "Michael, I found it. Your death was not fate. It was a crime." He closed his eyes, letting out a shaky breath. When he opened them again, his gaze was sharp as steel. He knew in that moment the battle was no longer about a forged will. This was murder, and Clara and Victor would not escape. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Slow, cold. Richard turned his head. A shadowed figure was approaching. He pressed the folder tightly against his chest. The war in the darkness had begun. The sound of footsteps echoed through the dark hallway of the Jenkins mansion that night. They did not belong to Clara or Victor, but to the police officers Richard had secretly alerted. Quietly, they surrounded the house, and by the next morning, Richard had already submitted the entire file of evidence to the prosecutor's office. With no way out, Clara was forced to face trial. The courtroom was packed that day. Cold light fell across the long wooden benches. The townspeople crowded in, curious, indignant, waiting. On the high bench, Judge Harold Williams, a man in his 60s with a thin frame but piercing eyes, stepped forward. He struck the gavel 3 times, his voice booming, The court is now in session. At the prosecution's table, Sarah Collins, a well-known prosecutor famous for her sharp mind and blunt honesty, adjusted the thick file on her desk. She cast a glance at Clara, her eyes like ice. Clara walked in wearing a tight black dress, her hair pulled back neatly, her face carefully composed in false grief. She bowed her head slightly, fake tears shimmering. Beside her, Victor shifted nervously, and the fraudulent attorney Robert Harris wiped sweat from his forehead. Elena sat in the front row, clutching Richard's hand tightly. She wore a mint green dress Daniel had washed clean, her hair combed neatly, though her eyes still flickered with fear when they landed on Clara. Prosecutor Sarah stood, opening in a firm voice. Your Honor, today we present evidence proving that the death of Michael Jenkins was not the result of natural illness, but of a deliberate and organized scheme. Furthermore, the will produced by Clara Collins is a forgery. She handed the documents to the judge and the jury. Papers were passed around, the handwriting clearly different. The official forensic report from the legitimate attorney Harris was read aloud. The signature was completely forged, bearing no match to the original samples. The courtroom stirred with noise. Clara held on to her thin smile, but her hands were clenched so tightly they turned white. Next, Sarah called the first witness, Evelyn Thompson, the elderly neighbor. Evelyn leaned on her cane, taking slow steps to the stand. Her voice trembled, yet carried weight. I have been silent for too long. Many times I saw Clara driving Elena out into the cold porch. Once, the poor child stood there shivering with nothing but her teddy bear in her arms. I wanted to bring her in, but Clara screamed at me, "Don't interfere, old woman." I regret my silence to this very day. Richard bowed his head in gratitude, and Elena looked at Mrs. Evelyn, her eyes brimming with tears. Clara suddenly jumped up and screamed, "She is making this up. That girl stole. She is the disgrace of this family." The entire room froze. Elena sobbed, tears spilling down her face. The little girl trembled as she clung to Richard's arm. Richard tightened his grip on her small hand, his voice rising above the heavy atmosphere. "You are not a disgrace. You are my pride. Michael left me Elena, and that is the greatest gift of all." Elena burst into tears, but within those tears a faint light of hope flickered. The second witness, Monica Brown, the former maid, stepped forward. She wore a simple dress, her hands still trembling, but her eyes were steady. "I was fired by Clara just because I gave a bowl of soup to Elena. I was afraid and stayed silent, but I cannot live in guilt forever. The truth is, she never once treated that child as family." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Several guests who had once been close to Clara now looked at her with open contempt. Sarah called two more witnesses, neighbors who had seen Clara neglect Elena many times. Their testimonies unanimously exposed her true nature. Victor began to lose control, sweating, casting anxious glances toward Clara. Then came the prosecutor's final piece of evidence, the medical records Richard had found. The report showed that Michael's medication had been tampered with, leading to his sudden death. The courtroom nearly erupted. Clara tried to shout over the noise, her voice shrill. "That is a lie. Everything has been fabricated. Richard just wants to steal the inheritance, so he is framing me." But before she could continue, Victor leapt to his feet in panic. "No, she's the one behind it all. I only followed Clara's orders. I never wanted to hurt anyone." The room exploded in chaos. Clara spun around, her eyes blazing. "Coward, you dare betray me?" Victor lowered his head, trembling, avoiding her furious glare. Judge Williams slammed his gavel down hard, his commanding voice cutting through the uproar. "Order! Clara Collins, Victor Miller, and Robert Harris. You are all hereby remanded into custody on charges of forgery, fraud, and involvement in the death of Mr. Michael Jenkins." The gavel strike echoed with the weight of justice. Police officers stepped forward. Clara thrashed wildly, screaming with venom, "You will all pay for this, every one of you." She was handcuffed, but as she passed by Elena, Clara stopped, her eyes burning with malice. Her voice dropped to a hiss through clenched teeth. "You will pay, remember that." Elena stepped back, pressing herself against Richard. He held her tightly, his resolute gaze refusing to let any threat shatter the trust he had rebuilt. As Clara was led away, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Elena buried her face against Richard's shoulder, whispering through sobs, "Uncle Richard, did we win?" Richard squeezed her tiny hand, his eyes fixed on the doorway where sunlight streamed into the chamber, his voice trembling softly, "Not yet, Elena, but justice is on our side." The courtroom doors closed, and the noise inside slowly faded away. Outside, the sky was washed in a pale gray, clouds drifting slowly as if they had just survived a storm. Richard stepped out, one hand clutching the folder of documents, the other holding tightly onto Elena's small hand. She was still trembling, her eyes red from tears. On the courthouse steps, Elena tilted her head up, her voice hoarse. "Uncle Richard, do I even have a place to go now?" The question lodged in Richard's throat. In the child's eyes he saw not only fear, but also the terrifying emptiness of a soul stripped of its shelter. Richard bent down, pulled Elena into his arms, his hand trembling as he stroked her soft hair. "From now on, this is your home," he whispered, his voice rough but steady. Elena clung to him, a cry breaking free, small but echoing from the depths of her heart. In that moment, Richard knew he had just made a promise he could never take back for the rest of his life. A few weeks later, Richard's house was no longer silent. Breakfast was filled with the clinking of dishes, the sound of clumsy footsteps, and the bright laughter of a little girl that now filled the once cold space. Max had started physical therapy with a walking frame. Every step was a battle, his legs trembling as though they might collapse. But right beside him, Elena ran after him, her eyes shining, her clear voice ringing out. "You can do it, Max. Just one more step." Max pressed his lips together, sweat rolling down his forehead. He gripped the frame tightly and pushed himself forward. When his foot touched the floor, his body swayed, but for the first time, he had managed to stand. Richard stood a few feet away, both hands covering his face, tears welling in his eyes. He turned away to hide them, but the choked sound escaped anyway. "Michael, do you see this? My son is standing again, and it's all because of Elena." Max looked up and saw his father crying. He froze, and for a brief moment, his eyes softened in a way they rarely ever did. Elena watched them both, her small heart overflowing with warmth. One afternoon, Evelyn Thompson arrived with her cane. She stepped into the yard, her eyes taking in a scene so different from what it once had been. The house now echoed with laughter, children chattering over stories, dishes clinking as Elena tried to help clumsily. Evelyn sat down on the wooden chair on the porch, smiling. "This house, it's full of laughter now. Michael can finally rest in peace." Richard poured her a cup of hot tea and nodded gently. He said nothing more, only let his gaze rest on Elena, who was busy helping Max arrange his books on the table. That image was enough to answer every unspoken word. Elena leaned toward Max and whispered softly, as if she wanted only the two of them to hear. "We lost our dad, we lost our mom, but now, at least, we have each other." Max paused for a moment. He turned his face away, but the corner of his lips lifted slightly, as if a smile had finally found its way back. One evening, as the sky turned into a fiery red sunset, Richard sat in the middle of the living room. He stretched out his hands and called both children over. Elena ran to him first, holding his left hand. Max slowly rolled his wheelchair closer, resting his hand on his father's right hand. Richard looked at them both, his voice low but firm. "Family is not defined by blood. Family is love. From today on, we are a family." Elena lifted her gaze, her bright eyes shimmering as she whispered with a trembling voice, "Dad, I'm not afraid of the dark anymore." Richard pulled them both into his arms, feeling as if his chest had widened to hold all the loss and all the hope at once. Outside the window, the sunset spread across the sky, casting light over the house and turning it into a place that truly belonged to them. That night, after Max had fallen asleep, Richard remained in his armchair, reading through the last pages of the file. He knew that the road ahead would not be made of happiness alone. There would also be trials, for wounds of the past could not heal in a single day. But when he glanced at Elena, who had dozed off with her teddy bear, a smile formed on his lips. Michael was gone, but he had left behind a legacy far greater than wealth, a legacy of trust and kindness that Richard was now carrying forward. On Sunday, Daniel Miller also came by. He brought along a few old toys and a children's book. Elena hugged the gifts and squealed with joy. Daniel smiled, then looked at Richard. "Looks like your home has truly come back to life." Richard nodded. "Not just come back to life, it's being rewritten from the beginning." Daniel shook Richard's hand, then looked at Elena and Max with tender eyes. Deep inside, the old memories of the battlefield suddenly felt lighter. When night fell, the three of them, Richard, Elena, and Max, sat together on the porch. A gentle breeze stirred under the round, bright moon. Elena rested her head on Richard's shoulder and whispered, "Dad, if my father were still alive, he would surely thank you." Richard didn't answer right away. He gently kissed the tangled hair of the little girl, his eyes fixed on the night sky. In his heart, a voice rose. "Michael, you can rest in peace. I have kept my word." In the end, the story closes with a simple yet profound message. Evil may conceal the truth for a while, but it can never escape forever. Clara, Victor, and their accomplices had to face justice, while Elena, the little girl who proved to be strong despite her size, found a new home where real love existed. Good people may endure pain and injustice, but in the end, they will be rewarded as they deserve. This is precisely what heartwarming stories, these touching tales, always want to share with everyone. Because sometimes, kindness and love are the only light that can drive away the darkness. What do you think about today's story? If you were in Richard's place, the man who reached out and saved Elena, would you be willing to do the same when faced with injustice right before your eyes? And do you believe that love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds? I also care deeply about you, the companions of the Story 4 Heart channel. How have you been lately? Are you going through stressful or difficult days? Please share your feelings in the comments. I always read and treasure every word you confide. Thank you for listening until the end. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video to spread this human message. See you again in the next episodes of Story 4 Heart, where every story is a bridge of love.